My name is Sarah, and this is my story. Make sure you subscribe and watch to the end.
She hadn't slept in 3 days. 3 days. No food breaks. No naps. No one checking on her. Just her, a laptop, 2 monitors, and a problem so big that if she stopped, even for an hour, it might already be too late. Now picture this. It's Monday morning. A regular office. People walking in with their coffees, pulling off their coats, logging into their computers. Normal day. And there, at one of the desks near the back, a woman. Head down, arms folded on the desk, completely still, fast asleep. Her name is Sarah, and her boss, Kevin, walked in at 8:15 that morning, saw her there, and made a decision in less than 60 seconds. He didn't walk over and ask if she was okay. He didn't check the system logs that would have told him everything. He didn't look at the on-call records with her name on them going back to Friday night. He walked to the printer, printed 1 page, walked back to her desk, set it down next to her cold coffee, and left. It was her termination letter. What Kevin did not know, what he could not have imagined, because he never bothered to look, was that while he was home sleeping in his own bed on Friday night, on Saturday night, on Sunday night, Sarah had been the only thing standing between his company and complete financial collapse. She had fought, alone, for 72 hours straight. Question 1. How does one person, by herself, with no backup, no official authorization, and no sleep, fight off a professional cyber attack for 72 straight hours? And win? Question 2. Why didn't anyone know she was doing it? Why didn't she just pick up the phone and call for help? And question 3. When the truth finally came out, and it did come out, all of it, what happened to Kevin? I'll answer all 3 before this video is over. But first, you need to know who Sarah was, where she came from, and how she ended up in that chair, in that office, fighting a battle that nobody asked her to fight. Because that's the part that makes everything else make sense. Let's go back to the beginning. Sarah grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Not a glamorous city, not a tech hub, just a regular Midwestern city with regular Midwestern streets, and the kind of neighborhoods where people mow their own lawns and know their neighbors' first names. Her dad taught high school math for 23 years. Her mom worked in the billing department at a regional hospital. They were good people, steady people, the kind of family where you did your homework before dinner and you didn't complain about things you could control. Sarah was the middle kid. She had an older brother, Danny, who played football and was loud about it, and a younger sister, Kayla, who was loud about everything else. And then there was Sarah. Quiet. Not shy exactly, just observant. Like she was always watching how things worked before she decided whether to say anything about it. Her teachers wrote the same word on every report card, year after year. Reserved. Her mom had a different word. She called her a thinker. The computer in the family den became Sarah's thing somewhere around age 13. Not games, mostly. She'd play games a little, but what really got her attention was how the computer itself worked. The network. The connections. Where information went when you sent it somewhere. By the time she was 16, she had quietly mapped out every wireless connection point in her school building. Not to do anything with it. She never touched anything she wasn't supposed to. She just wanted to understand the shape of it, where the edges were, where someone could get in if they wanted to. Her brother Danny called her a weird computer nerd, which, from a big brother, was basically a compliment. He wasn't wrong. Sarah got into Ohio State on a partial scholarship. Computer science. She paid for the rest herself, for years of evening shifts at a call center, talking to frustrated customers about billing problems while her classmates went to parties. She didn't complain about that either. She had a plan, and the plan required the degree. So she worked, and she studied, and she showed up, and 4 years later she walked across a stage and shook a dean's hand with hands that were a little rough from 4 years of doing things the hard way. No recruiter came knocking afterward. No big tech company sent a congratulations email. The resume went out. The interviews happened. And the offer that came back was modest, a junior IT security analyst position at a company called Hargrove Financial Services, based in Cincinnati. Not a name you'd recognize. She took it because she understood something that a lot of young graduates with big dreams have to learn the hard way. The work you do when nobody's watching is the work that builds you. Sarah's first few years in the industry followed a pattern. She would arrive at a company. She would spend a few months learning how everything worked, not just her specific job, but the whole system. The gaps, the weaknesses, The doors that looked locked but weren't quite. And then she would write it up. Formally. Professionally. Send it to the right people. And then she would wait. And most of the time, the report would be acknowledged. And then nothing would happen. She changed companies twice in 4 years. Not dramatically. She gave notice. She was professional about it. But both times, the reason was the same. She could see the problems. She knew how to fix them. And nobody in a position to do anything about it seemed particularly interested. The second job, she submitted a security vulnerability report in her 3rd month. Detailed. Specific. She flagged 3 separate issues that she classified as high priority. She got a reply 6 weeks later. It said, "Thanks for this, we'll keep it on file." On file. She started looking for her next job the following Monday. Her 3rd employer was Meridian Financial Services, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. She arrived with what you might call calibrated expectations. She wasn't starry-eyed anymore. She knew how these places worked. She had a methodology by now. Arrive, learn the system, identify the problems, document everything, submit through proper channels, give the organization a fair amount of time to respond, and then decide what the silence means. She gave Meridian longer than she'd given the others. Because this time, the stakes felt different to her. Meridian managed the financial accounts of over 200,000 clients. Regular people. A retired teacher in Raleigh with her life savings in a managed account. A young couple in Charlotte saving for their first house. A grandfather in Greensboro who had set up a trust for his grandchildren before he passed. Real money. Real lives. Real people who had trusted this company with the things they could not afford to lose. Sarah understood that. She felt the weight of it. And that weight, that sense of genuine responsibility, is exactly what kept her at her desk when everyone else went home. It's also what put her directly in the path of what was coming. Meridian Financial Services had been open for 30 years. It had survived the dot-com crash. It had survived 2008, when half the financial industry was on its knees. It had survived the pandemic. By any measure, it was a resilient company. But resilient doesn't mean safe. And this is an important distinction. Meridian was a financial company that used technology. It was not a technology company. And those two things are very, very different. Financial companies think in quarters. They plan in fiscal years. They respond to threats on the timeline of committee reviews and budget cycles. Hackers don't work on that timeline. Hackers work in hours. That gap between how fast the threat moves and how slowly the institution responds is where almost every major breach is born. And Meridian had that gap wide open. In the year before everything happened, Meridian spent about 1% of its operating budget on cybersecurity. The industry standard for a company managing that volume of sensitive financial data is around 8%. 1%. To protect 200,000 people's financial lives. That's not an accident. That's a choice. And choices like that come from the top. The entire cybersecurity team at Meridian consisted of 4 people. 4. There was Marcus. Been in IT for 15 years. Solid. Reliable. Liked by everyone. Also 13 months from retirement and spending a lot more mental energy thinking about his fishing cabin in Tennessee than about firewall configurations. You couldn't blame him. He'd earned it. There was Dev. Smart, ambitious, already quietly sending out resumes to other companies because he could see the ceiling at Meridian was low and made of concrete. He gave good work every day, but his heart was already halfway out the door. There was Phil, technically the team lead, which at Meridian meant he had the title but not the budget authority, not the executive access, and not the ear of anyone above him in the building. A title without power is just a word. And then there was Sarah, the youngest, the only woman on the team, and by this point in her career, thoroughly accustomed to both of those things. For people, one underfunded, under-resourced, under-listened to team, protecting the financial data of 200,000 people, and the rest of the company walking past their little office every day with absolutely no idea what was happening inside it. Now I need to tell you about Kevin. Kevin had been at Meridian for 18 years. He had survived every layoff, every leadership change, every corporate restructuring the company had gone through. He knew the organization the way only someone who has outlasted everyone else can know it. He was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He was not a villain. He was not malicious. He was something almost more dangerous than that. He was incurious. Kevin had moved into IT management from operations, a lateral shift he'd made about 10 years back when a position opened and he was willing to fill it. He'd learned enough to sound plausible in meetings. He knew the vocabulary, firewalls, endpoints, threat vectors. He could nod along convincingly. But the actual work his team did, the real texture of it, that was a foreign country to him, and he had long since stopped trying to learn the language. The best managers, the really good ones, know what they don't know, and they build trust with the people who do know. They ask questions. They create space for the experts on their team to actually be experts. Kevin managed his knowledge gap differently. If he didn't understand the threat probably wasn't that serious. If the report was long and technical and the person writing it was the youngest person on the team, well, there was a hierarchy for a reason. Sarah had filed 2 formal reports in her time at Meridian. Both had been received. Neither had resulted in any action. She had followed up on both. Kevin had replied to one of them with, "Thanks, Sarah. I'll loop in Phil and we'll discuss at the monthly meeting." The monthly meeting had come and gone. They had not discussed it. The group that targeted Meridian was not a random attacker. This was not some teenager in a basement running software he downloaded from a forum, throwing things at a wall and seeing what stuck. This was organized, professional, the kind of operation that has a structure, has roles, has a methodology, and has done this before. Federal investigators would later confirm that this group had successfully breached at least 4 other financial companies before they turned their attention to Meridian. They had a track record, they had a process, and they had the patience that separates amateur criminals from dangerous ones. They picked their targets carefully. They looked for companies that were big enough to be worth attacking, but not so big that they had enterprise-grade security teams watching every corner of their network. They looked for institutions that had grown faster than their security had kept pace with, companies running on legacy systems and skeleton crews. In the security world, this profile has a name. They call it the sweet spot. Meridian hit every point on that target profile. They started probing Meridian's systems 6 weeks before the Friday that this story turns on. And when I say probing, I don't mean attacking. Not yet. I mean testing. Gently. Quietly. The digital equivalent of walking around a building at night and trying door handles. Not to go in. Not yet. Just to find out which ones weren't quite closed all the way. In cybersecurity, this phase has a name. They call it the dwell time. The time between first contact and the actual strike. Professional hacking groups run long dwell times, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, because patience is a weapon. The longer you watch a target, the better you understand its rhythms. When is the security team at full strength? When do they go home? When does the building go quiet? They were watching Meridian, learning it, waiting. And during those 6 weeks, Sarah noticed things. Small things. The kind of things that don't trigger automated alerts. A traffic pattern that didn't match the baseline she'd spent 18 months learning to read. A tiny latency spike in a part of the network that had no reason to spike. Login attempts from IP addresses that were almost right, but not quite. She documented every one of them. She wrote it up. 12 pages. Specific. Detailed. She cited every log entry she'd flagged, explained what each one meant, and proposed 3 specific actions she recommended taking immediately. She marked it high priority. Kevin read it. She could see the read receipt. He replied 4 days later. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll loop in Phil and we'll review at the monthly meeting." The monthly meeting was 3 weeks away. She followed up in person with Phil, who told her that some of the signals she was describing were consistent with routine vendor testing that had been scheduled. She asked which vendor. She asked when the testing was scheduled. Phil said he'd check and get back to her. He never got back to her. Sarah sat with a decision. She could escalate. Go above Kevin. Go above Phil. Walk into the COO's office with her 12 pages and say, "I believe we have an active threat in our system and nobody on the management chain is taking it seriously." That is a significant move for a junior analyst. That's going over 2 people's heads without authorization. That's the kind of move that, if she was wrong, would follow her career for years. Or she could keep watching, keep documenting, and be ready. She chose to be ready. She didn't know yet what that choice was going to cost her. The Friday before everything changed, she got to work at 7 a.m. and didn't leave until 7 p.m. On her way out, a colleague called her. His mother had been taken to the hospital. He was supposed to be on call that weekend. Could she cover? She said yes. She said yes because that's who she was. And somewhere, on the other side of a screen she'd never see, a group of people who had been watching and waiting for 6 weeks looked at the calendar. Friday night. Weekend. Skeleton Monitoring. A company that didn't know they were coming. The countdown hit 0. It was an ordinary Friday night. Sarah was on the couch. She'd made a reasonable attempt at relaxing. The TV was on. She had a blanket. She'd ordered Thai food earlier. She was technically off the clock. But the monitoring dashboard was open on her laptop. Because for people who take security seriously, really seriously, there is no fully off the clock. It's always there in the background. Like a second heartbeat. You're not always consciously watching it. But some part of you always is. At 11:47 p.m., something changed in that second heartbeat. One alert. Small. Amber, not red. Low priority, the way the automated system classified it. The kind of thing the algorithm would have cleared by morning, filed under false positive, forgotten by the next shift. Sarah sat up. She pulled the laptop fully onto her lap, opened the full log, started tracing the alert back through the network pathway it had come from. And in 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, the picture that started assembling in front of her made her stomach drop. This wasn't vendor testing. This wasn't a glitch. This was a footprint. Someone was inside. She picked up her phone. Kevin's name was right there on the screen. She could call him right now. Midnight on a Friday, he wouldn't be happy about it. But this was exactly the kind of thing you made that call for. She almost pressed it. And then she stopped. Because she thought through what happened if she was wrong. She was the junior analyst. She had already submitted a high-priority report that had been quietly set aside. If she called Kevin at midnight with what might still turn out to be a false positive, the professional damage would be real. She'd seen what happened to people who cried wolf on a security alert. You don't get fired for it, usually. You just get smaller. People stop listening to you as closely. Then a second alert pinged. Same signature. Different entry point. Then a third. She put the phone face down on the coffee table. And she went to work. What she found over the next 2 hours was worse than she expected. The intrusion wasn't a single point of attack. It was 3 separate pathways, running in a coordinated rotation. Not all at once, which would have been too obvious, but taking turns. Each one going active while the others rested. Like a team working shifts. And the way they got in. A valid username and password. A real employee's login credentials. Someone's actual account. Which meant one of two things. Either that employee had been phished. Their credentials stolen without them knowing it. And she opened a fresh legal pad. Saturday morning came. She hadn't slept. She'd eaten half a granola bar she found in her laptop bag sometime around 3 a.m. She'd made coffee twice. The second cup had gone cold without her noticing. By noon on Saturday, she had mapped the full scope of what she was dealing with. 3 nodes. 3 infiltration points working toward 3 target systems. The first target was Meridian's client database. Names, account numbers, financial histories. The personal information of 200,000 people. The second target was the transaction processing engine, the system that actually moved money. And the third, the most dangerous one, the one that made her jaw tighten when she confirmed it, was the authentication servers. Let me explain why that third one was so serious. The client database being breached is bad. People's personal information stolen. That's a regulatory nightmare. Lawsuits. Years of damage control. The transaction engine being breached is worse. Money being moved without authorization, accounts drained, chaos. But the authentication server? If they got full control of that, they wouldn't just be stealing from Meridian. They would become Meridian. They could impersonate the company's own systems. They could reroute transactions and make them look legitimate. They could lock out every real employee and take over from the inside. Every bank, every broker, every client that connected to Meridian systems would be talking to the attackers without knowing it. The financial damage would have been in the tens of millions. The reputational damage, for a company whose entire existence depends on the word trust, might have been unsurvivable. Sarah was the only door between that outcome and 200,000 people who were having a perfectly normal Saturday. Walking their dogs, watching football, checking their balances on their phones. None of them had any idea. She made more coffee, ate the other half of the granola bar, and kept working. The attackers were not passive. That was the part that made this so exhausting. Every time she blocked a pathway, shut down an access point, cut off a route they were using, they adapted. They had contingencies, backup routes, alternative approaches. It was like playing chess against someone who had already seen 3 moves ahead. She later described it as the most mentally demanding experience of her life. And she was 36 hours in no sleep at that point. At around 11 p.m. Saturday, she made a decision. She was going to stop playing defense. She was going to build a trap. In security, this is called a honeypot. The idea is this. Instead of just blocking the attacker, you create a fake pathway that looks real. A convincing crack in the wall. Something that an attacker, believing their own momentum, believing they're winning, will rush toward. And while they follow the fake trail deeper into what looks like a vulnerable system, you use that time to quietly dismantle all of their real access points behind them. It's elegant, it requires precision, and it carries real risk. Because if the attackers figure out it's a decoy before you finish the work behind them, they'll trigger their payload early and everything you've been holding together for 2 days collapses. She built the honeypot, and then she waited. For 4 hours from midnight to 4 a.m. Sunday morning, she sat at that desk and watched them follow it. She didn't sleep. She barely moved. Every time a new indicator came in showing them going deeper into the fake pathway, she used the window it bought her to close another real door. One by one, quietly, behind them. At 4:17 a.m. on Sunday morning, she locked the third and final real access point. The attackers were inside the honeypot, a dead end with no real data, no real systems, no real anything. And they didn't know it yet. She leaned back in her chair, pressed her palms flat on the desk, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 days. Then she sat up and started writing the incident report. She wrote for hours. Every log entry, every decision she made and why she made it, every move the attackers made and how she responded. The timeline of the honeypot, when she built it, when they took the bait, when she closed the real doors behind them. 47 pages. She saved it to 3 separate encrypted locations. One on the company's internal secure server, one to a personal encrypted drive, one to a cloud backup. Then she checked it one more time. Then she closed the laptop. She changed her clothes, brushed her teeth, made one final cup of coffee. She drove to the office. Her car was the only one in the parking lot. She walked inside. The building was dark and quiet. She sat at her desk, and her head lowered, lower, until it rested gently on her folded arms. She was asleep in less than 2 minutes. Kevin arrived at 8:15. Kevin had had a good weekend. Didn't tap her shoulder. Didn't ask a colleague if they knew what was going on. Didn't check the on-call calendar that had her name down for the entire weekend. Didn't open his email, where if he'd scrolled back to Friday night, he would have found an automated system alert routed to him that he'd never opened. He walked to the printer, printed the termination letter, walked back to her desk, and set it down next to her cold coffee. He looked at her one more time. She didn't move. He turned and walked to his 9 a.m. meeting. A co-worker gently touched Sarah's shoulder some time later. Sarah lifted her head slowly. The confusion of someone woken in a strange place. Then the office coming into focus. Then the clock. Then the letter. She read it once. Read it again. And then she sat completely still for what people who were watching said felt like a very long time. She wasn't crying. She wasn't visibly upset. She was just still. Then she picked up her phone. Not to call Kevin. Not to call HR. Not to call her mom. She called the secure cloud storage where she'd backed up the incident report at 5 a.m. Confirmed it was there. Confirmed it was accessible. Confirmed every page had uploaded correctly. Then she put her phone in her bag, put her employee badge on the desk beside the termination letter, and walked out. By 11 a.m., Sarah was no longer an employee of Meridian Financial Services. By 2 p.m., Meridian's routine daily security scan flagged anomalies from the weekend. By 4 p.m., the head of IT infrastructure was on the phone with outside consultants, his voice 3 pitches higher than usual. By 4:30, someone in that panicked Monday afternoon conversation said a sentence that would change everything. They said, "Has anyone checked the incident log?" The head of IT at Meridian, a man named Robert who had been in the industry for 20 years and thought he had seen most things, opened the internal incident documentation system, expecting a brief automated note. He found 47 pages, timestamped 5:23 a.m. Monday. He opened it, started reading. He read in silence for several minutes. Then he started again from the beginning. He began reading sections aloud to the room. One person in that room said afterward that it read like someone who had written it knowing they might not be there to explain it. Robert looked up from the report, and he asked the question, "Who wrote this? And where are they now?" Someone slid Kevin's termination letter across the table. The person who had held the line for 72 hours, who had outmaneuvered a professional criminal organization, who had preserved every system, protected every client account, and documented every moment of it in a report that was now making 20-year veterans go quiet, had been fired that morning for sleeping at her desk. Kevin was called into a glass-walled office. The door closed. The blinds went down. A printed copy of the incident report was placed in front of him. Kevin was in that room for 40 minutes. He came in with the settled confidence of a manager who has made a decision and feels okay about it. He did not come out that way, because what he was reading, page by page, starting with the Friday night alerts that had been automatically routed to his email and never opened, was the full picture of what he had done, and what he had almost allowed to happen. The appendix of Sarah's report included, as supporting documentation, her 2 previous risk reports, the ones she had submitted through proper channels, the ones that had been received and set aside, the ones that had specifically flagged the exact vulnerability the attackers had used to get in. She hadn't just stopped the attack. She had predicted it, reported it, been ignored, and then fought its consequences alone for 3 days. Sarah got a phone call at 6:15 p.m. Monday evening. It was Meridian's chief operating officer, a woman named Linda, someone Sarah had seen in company meetings and passed in hallways, but had never once directly spoken to in 3 years of employment. Linda asked if Sarah could come in the next morning. Sarah said she'd think about it. She hung up, had dinner, thought, then she called back. She said she'd come in, and she'd be bringing someone with her. She brought an attorney. They brought the COO, the head of HR, and a representative from the company's legal team. And between them on the conference room table, Sarah's 47-page report, printed, bound. The details of what was negotiated in that room are confidential, but the broad outline we know. Sarah was fully reinstated. She received back pay for every day of wrongful termination. She received a formal written apology from the organization. She was promoted, not back to her old role, to senior security architect, a position that came with a direct reporting line to the executive team. No more Kevin in between. No more reports disappearing into inboxes. A cybersecurity budget increase of over 400%, and the authority to hire and lead her own team. Kevin was quietly moved to a different division. He no longer managed technical staff. No dramatic fighting. No public humiliation. Just a transfer that everyone in the building understood the meaning of. Sarah's incident report didn't just save her job. It became the foundation of a federal cybercrime investigation. The techniques she had documented, the attackers' timing patterns, the way they rotated their access points, the specific signatures of their intrusion methods, matched a group that federal agents were already tracking across multiple states. They had been looking for a thread, a complete, real-time record of the group's methods from inside an active attack. Sarah had handed them 47 pages of exactly that. But here's the part one want you to sit with. The credential they used to get into Meridian in the first place, the valid login that gave them their initial access, belonged to a former employee. Someone who had left the company 18 months earlier when Meridian did a round of cost-cutting layoffs. Someone whose user account had never been deactivated. Sarah had flagged that exact vulnerability in her very first report at Meridian. Improperly maintained, off-boarded employee credentials. She had called it a high-priority risk. Kevin had replied, "Thanks, Sarah. I'll loop and fill." She predicted the attack. She reported the vulnerability that enabled it. She was ignored. She fought the consequences of being ignored for 72 hours straight. And then she was fired for being tired. I want to slow down for a moment before we close this out, because this story matters beyond Sarah, beyond Meridian. Beyond one woman and one bad Monday morning. There are people like Sarah in almost every organization you can think of. In a hospital that has your medical records. In the bank where your savings live. In the company that manages your retirement fund. They're working in rooms without windows. On teams of 4 when there should be 40. Filing reports that get red receipts and no replies. They see the problems coming before anyone else does. They have the training, the instinct, and the documentation to prove it. And they're being managed in too many places by people who have confused authority with understanding. Sarah's story spread first through the cybersecurity community, professional forums, private channels, the kind of spaces where people who do this work talk honestly about what it's actually like. It spread because everyone in those spaces recognized it. Not as a shocking, one-in-a-million story. How many Sarahs have you walked past today? All right, before you go, I need 2 things from you. First, drop a comment and tell me this. If you were Kevin and someone walked into your office and put that 47-page report in front of you, what is the first thing you say to her when you see her again? I genuinely want to know, because I've asked that question in a few places and the answers are all over the map. Some people said they'd apologize immediately. Some people said there's no apology big enough. Some people, and this is the interesting part, said they'd probably try to justify it. What would you do? Tell me in the comments. And second, have you ever been the Sarah in the room? Have you ever flagged something important through the right channels and watched it disappear into someone's inbox? Have you ever been the person doing the invisible work that holds something together and had no one notice until something went wrong? Tell me that story, because those stories deserve to be heard too. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Also press the notification bell to be informed when we drop a new video.